Matt Roberts with D1.ticker and Coaches Wire back at the 2024 AVCA Convention here in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm joined by Texas Associate Head Coach Erik Sullivan. Long stretch on 40 acres.
About 13 years, getting on 14 years now.
14 years. It's a lot of change in the volleyball marketplace in 14 years. Let's start here. And obviously you guys won back-to-back national championships very recently. Last night we saw two amazing matches, very unique in their own ways, I think we would say. The reverse sweep for Penn State. I went to bed after the first two sets. How do we continue growing the game at the pace it's growing now?
Yeah.
We've got record attendance, increased ratings, attendance not only postseason but on campuses as well. Where do you feel strongly where we need to double down to make sure this growth compounds?
It's a great question. I think a lot of it is happening somewhat organically at the junior level for us. You've seen that in the last 5 or 6 years, just the growth of the participation numbers for us at the junior level, I think is probably propping that up from the bottom. But I think we got to continue to strive to get it out in the public eye. The fact that networks are picking up our products now, putting them on in great slots on the weekends, that we're generating nice numbers when they're doing that, I think helps get it out there. Having events like this, you're starting to see a little bit more structure around some preseason events in big arenas.
We had one here this year, of course.
Yeah,
right.
So trying to drive that market well. I just think kind of keep pushing the product. I think the product speaks for itself. Most people that come watch a women's volleyball match that have never seen one before walk out of the gym kind of blown away at everything about it, the team aspect of it, the athleticism of it. And then using big events, obviously the Final Four is a big event for us. The Olympics, I think, help drives that. The profile for indoor volleyball and beach volleyball skyrocket during those periods of time. I just think we got to keep using those platforms to kind of keep pushing the product out there.
What's the level of awareness at the club level of the sport's sort of transcendency? And I'm sure, it's a very general question. There's different size clubs, different how serious they are about competition versus just overall personal development, et cetera. But for the clubs that you come in contact with, and you're recruiting at a high level, so a lot of the biggest clubs around the nation, do they also understand the change that our industry is going through and how that will impact the individuals in their programs?
I think so. Part of the problem with all the change is there's so much uncertainty right now. I feel like we get wind of some rules that are being discussed. We get some deadlines that we think are going to happen, and 3 months later, all that tends to shift. And so I think we're kind of operating in this environment where it's hard for us to function because we're not really sure exactly what it's going to look like. I think that trickles down to the lower level as well. Obviously I think they see the growth, the fact that we're going to have 3 pro leagues in the U.S. this year. I think I think any sport that has a professional platform that junior players can strive to, I think is always going to help generate some interest in it because it's a future beyond college, right? It's no longer, hey, I just want to get a scholarship. It's, hey, most of the players that we talk to have aspirations beyond college of playing professional. So college is a piece of that, and they're highly invested in what we do, but it's also a platform for them to go on, play professionally, and possibly for the national team.
When you're recruiting a prospective student athlete, and let's say it's a high school student athlete, how early in the process of this recruitment are they asking questions about the issues that are dominating them that we don't know a lot about yet, but that they want clarity on? Is that conversation 1, conversation 10?
Fortunately, I think for volleyball right now, I don't think it's conversation 1 most of the time. We bring it up and talk about it because it's out there. We're not just going to kind of put our head in the sand and not have those discussions with our recruits and their families. But I don't feel like that it's dominating that discussion. I feel like you hear from other coaches in other sports that a lot of times is they'll sit down.
The issue.
Yeah,
right.
And that's the first question
determinant
that gets asked. I still feel like we're in an environment where the kids and parents care about the development side, not just as an athlete, but also as a human being and a person in the academics. And fortunately for us, I think those things still really matter. I also feel like that's shifting in an exponentially fast way. Maybe in the last 3 weeks, in some sense, where it's been overwhelming. And I think the noise of kind of what's happening with the revenue share lawsuit and numbers are getting thrown around. I don't think anybody really there's no real great, reliable source of information. And a lot of it's just hearsay, and you're hearing it from a couple people, and the kids, I'm sure, are hearing it from all kinds of people that they don't understand what it is, what it means. There's no regulation behind it. It just seems like the Wild West. So I would imagine it's going to become more of a topic.
So in the last 3 weeks, all types of prospective student athletes have started asking more questions about specifically house and revenue share?
Yes. And not just kids in the portal or recruits.
Right. When you said 3 weeks, in my head immediately went to, oh, you mean portal kids?
Correct. Right. And I think this is the first round of the portal for us, where the house lawsuit is actually getting close enough that it's got some ramifications going in the near future here.
I mean, what are we talking? What's the amount of money that at the highest level of women's indoor could sway a decision? Are we talking 50K, 200K? What's the number?
To be honest with you, I don't think we know the number. That's the part that's interesting. I feel like, again, school to school, administration to administration, they're talking about how they want to split all of that stuff up. And obviously volleyball is not football or basketball, so I think we're down in the pecking order a little bit. I think some schools are going to invest heavily in programs that are successful on their campuses. So it may look a lot different at Texas than it might look at another school where volleyball is maybe not as high of a priority for them. You know, I think, I don't know, you can look at specific schools that have Olympic sport success in one program. I would imagine that they're going to put some resources there to try to maintain that. So it's really hard to say. I've heard talking points around what you were talking about, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 all the way up into $250,000.
Do you, in the seat that you sit in the role that you occupy at Texas, is there this fear, and I'm going to use, Larry Ellison, the Oracle founder, and I'm not sure if it's his wife, I don't even know if that's been defined, if it's his wife or significant other, who wanted this Bryce Underwood.
For sure.
Is there a scenario in this sport where an incredibly wealthy benefactor comes along and says, well, I want the 10 best players in the nation, I'll pay them each? I mean...
Yeah, I think in the settlement, from what I understand, again, not my line of work necessarily, just information getting, I think there's a cap there, right? The $20 million, $22 million.
From what we can actually share on revenue.
Correct. So the idea that somebody can come in and just say, hey, I got $100 million for you to throw at players, there is some kind of cap. That may be the best thing we have going. But again, how that money gets distributed, how programs use that within your program. Let's say we get $100,000. Do I use that on one player? Do I use that on 3 players? Do I pay all of my team?
Are your current student athletes asking as well?
Not specifically, but they're curious about it. They're hearing it. Right. They're hearing the noise. We had at our end of the year team meeting, we talked about it, about, hey, this is going on. I'm sure you're going to hear all these things and numbers, and just know, most of it it's kind of crap, because I think most coaches don't really know what it looks like. I hope all these kids that are out there shopping around money are getting it in writing, because who knows what it looks like in a year. I know coaches are promising some stuff that I'm pretty sure that they don't really have an idea of what they're promising.
Or the contingency if house gets delayed a year.
Correct.
Right.
Or their admin comes back and says, hey, I know we said we were going to give you X amount of dollars. Things have shifted now, and you're only going to get half of that.
And the window to transfer is closed.
Correct. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of scenarios. That's happened in the NIL world. I mean, obviously you've seen that in some of the higher profile sports. It's definitely happened in volleyball. Players come in and, they promised me XX and Y, and they get there and they get a fraction of that.
Historically, the role of a head coach has also a secondary skill and responsibility is fundraising. Does that get even more accentuated in this marketplace?
I think it can. I think it also depends a ton on the university that you work at and how it's structured. Typically, we don't have a big role in that at the University of Texas. They like to take care of that through the foundation and other things. Doesn't mean that we don't have some responsibility there. So I would imagine there's going to be a lot of schools that don't have the financial capability to fund that through their budget that may look to that as part of that.
How do we tell the stories? Let's go back to sort of where we started here a little bit. And if we believe the upward trajectory of this sport is built heavily on the viewing public understanding who these women are on the courts, how do we tell those stories better?
I think it's, I don't know, social media, the media itself, I think they do a good job of putting those stories together. I think we just need to keep pushing it. I know in our program that we're trying to push that as much as possible, of trying to create opportunities for the public to not necessarily interact with our girls, but to understand kind of who they are and where they come from, what their normal life is like. Not so much just hey, when they put the jersey on and they're out there competing for 2 or 3 hours. We want that story to be told. We think we have some great people in our program and cool stories, and that should be part of the package, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's a campus level thing, that's a conference level thing, that's a national media.
And look, with the NIL landscape now, it behooves the athletes to go out and do that and to build their brand a little bit. I think that's part of the brand building, is letting people into your world a little bit.
One of those early fears with NIL was that student athletes were going to be spending so much time brand building and maybe have some distraction when it comes to skill building, skill development. Have you all seen that at all? And if so, how do you manage it?
Yeah, we've seen it, and not in a very direct way, meaning like, hey, I got to leave practice a half hour early because I have this commitment. I think we've laid down those guidelines, but more in a way of like, we have a day off, and we would love for our kids to recover, recuperate, get away from all of it, and all of a sudden they have 3 or 4 things they got to go take care of on top of the normal rigors of being a student athlete. It's just, we talk about this a lot, the time management piece. Time is a commodity for our kids. It's probably gotten a little out of control, I think. It's not what it was when I was competing as a college athlete a few decades ago. And we're hyper aware of that and concerned about it. If you look at our kids' daily schedule, it's, they're going 12, 13 hours a day, and they're moving from one thing to the next. And so to get them, we don't want them just checking boxes through their day. We want them to be intentful about what they're doing. We want them to be great students, just like we want them to be great athletes. And if they're just going to study hall to click that box, right, I don't know that they're achieving maybe what they could do at the highest level.
What do you think your specific group of student athletes in Austin right now would say if we gave them the opportunity to say, hey, you can change one thing about your student athlete experience? What tends to be areas of not concern, but dialogue and debate and discussion for the current student athlete experience?
God, it's a great question. To be honest with you, we don't hear a ton of complaints besides just of the busyness of it, of trying to get everything in during the day. When we need them to work out in a day and they're trying to piece that into their academic schedule and anything else they got going on. You start getting into other things. They're waking up earlier, they're losing sleep. What are you going to sacrifice to make sure that you're getting all this stuff done? I feel, again, I don't know, what I experienced as a college athlete, what I got into college coaching for, is just slowly getting stripped away. And it's becoming this model of like, hey, you got to be going for 13 hours and you got to do all of these things.
Very transactional.
It's becoming more and more transactional.
So for you as a coach to have been in this profession for 2 decades now, where do you find value in those relationships? Is it just the skill development piece when you can see? Okay.
For our program and for me personally, and the longer I'm in this, I take more joy out of the personal part of it. The one thing I learned, we won our first title in 2012. It doesn't solve all ills. You wake up on Monday and
still got some problems.
You still have all the problems that you had on Friday. It's a great feeling. It's an unbelievable thing to do. The more I've done it, and I've been fortunate to be around it a few times, I enjoy just watching our group celebrate and enjoy that moment, because I know I'm going to be in the office the next day dealing with the same stuff I was dealing with before we left. So for me, getting to know our girls, investing in them as people, helping them through the struggles of being an 18 to 22-year-old in this crazy, hectic time in their life where all these demands are getting thrown on them. They're still trying to figure out who they are as people, and watching them grow up a little bit is the cool part. And then seeing them move on, starting families, getting into professions. That's the part that
It's a transformational experience.
For sure.
Absolutely is.
And again, as a college coach, whether we win it or lose it, day one starts in a month. We start over, and how are we doing this again? And it's the volleyball is always going to be the volleyball. Trying to build a roster every year is always going to be trying to build a roster. And we tell the girls all the time, like, hey, we love that you're a part of our program, but there's going to be 15 or 16 more kids in 4 years, and we're going to be doing the same thing with them. So again, trying to get them invested in that piece. I think we do a good job. I think our girls enjoy the culture and being a part of our program in that way. And that's not just hey, we need to show up in the gym and we're going to, the skill acquisition piece, and we're going to make you stronger, faster, and higher, and we're going to make you a better volleyball player. It's the getting to know them, know that we care about them as people, and that we're going to be a part of their lives. It's not just this little 4-year period.
Yeah. Let's end where we began here, and if I gave you the opportunity to change one thing about roster management right now, but you cannot say the house deal is done and we know how it works, so you got to say something more controllable for coaches. Maybe it's the calendar.
Yeah.
Maybe it's how early you can contact or not.
I think the biggest, this is such an interesting thing. I think the biggest change that we can have is some regulation. I just feel right now that it's hard for us to behave in a way because we don't really understand or necessarily.
Does volleyball need a commissioner?
I think it's also an interesting question, right? There's a lot of talk about that for football. I don't know about why volleyball would be any different, or every sport maybe. And the one thing that I think is I've seen over my time coaching is that we're very reactionary. We don't like this, so we'll change a rule without really thinking about the unintended consequences of that rule or the incentives that it builds, and how we behave. And all of a sudden, 2 years later, like, oh crap, that rule sucks too. And so we just kind of swing back and forth instead of maybe having a map of, hey, this is what it should look like, and how do we get to that, instead of just piecemealing rules together.
If there's a day when football breaks away, or let's just play hypotheticals for a minute, Big Ten and SEC break away,
Sure.
How does that impact the sport of volleyball, women's volleyball?
Good. Nostradamus here. I hope in a great way. To be honest, the biggest concern I have for me is, I think women's volleyball is positioned in a great spot. I think what we've shown in the last 4 or 5 years of the growth and the popularity, the rising popularity of it, I feel like that we're a sport that's moving in the right direction. And I feel like there's a lot of programs and administrations that are pretty committed to keeping that going. What I am concerned is, I was an Olympian, is all the other Olympic sports that don't have that momentum right now, that maybe have the opposite, that what do those look like? How do those athletes get the training they need? How do they have the experience? And a bunch of these things, like, okay, great, we're treating the athletes what we think is better and they're getting paid, but we're limiting some opportunities and maybe destroying this great product of college athletics. Like, I keep asking myself, who's protecting that product? And again, it's just this reactionary thing to what's going on, and I have a fear that in 4 or 5 years we're going to look back and go, wow, this kind of sucks now.
I can't quite decide if it's reactionary forces or if it's just market forces.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an evolving market. Every marketplace, the oil industry in Texas evolves, right?
For sure.
Now, the regulation piece is interesting because we have such a lot of voices that get to make decisions. Less so now, given how the Power Four can dictate some things, but I at times I worry about coaches and administrators as well, who can't seem to effectively deal with ambiguity. Because as you noted earlier, you win a national championship, on Monday you still got the same problems. That's leading an organization. That's
Sure.
leading a business. That's leading a team.
For sure.
How would you guys feel as a coaching staff if, I don't know, 10 matches preseason were against all Power 4 teams and you didn't play, I'm making this up, North Texas, SFA?
I don't love it. To me, I think that's one of the special things about how we've built athletics into the higher education model, is that wherever you go to school, you have this athletic department that you can rally behind, whether you're involved in athletics or not. As an alumnus, doesn't matter if you go to Texas or Southeastern, Northwestern, whatever directional school, small town. That small town beats a Notre Dame every once in a while. makes a run in the NCAA tournament. And you can get that alumni group to rally around it, right? It involves our whole population. We start narrowing that down. It takes away what's great about college athletics. Yeah, hope. Every year's a new slate.
You either sell wins or you sell hope.
And look, not everyone goes to the University of Texas, right? But a lot of our population goes somewhere, grows up around a school, their parents went somewhere, all of a sudden you're separating them out as fans. And maybe they enjoy the sport, but they're not invested as like, hey, that's my team, or they don't get to see their team compete anymore. Maybe it stops to exist at some point. I'm surprised more of that hasn't happened.
There are a lot of fascinating challenges, but I think that also opens up an opportunity to change in ways that you're voicing that are maybe a little more thoughtful, maybe a little more considerate, while also knowing, I mean, we've built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and there's market forces that control that in some way. So
to go back to your question, I enjoy when I do a lot of our scheduling. We play a small school, and you got to kind of look at them. And, oh, what's their mascot? Who are they? You're putting a scout together, asking your team, do you guys even know where this school's from? You get a little bit of that in the tournament sometimes in the early rounds.
Yeah,
and someone will come to you, and you've never heard of them before, and you're like, we don't even know what their mascot is. It's
part of the novelty.
Yeah, which is, again, what I think it makes.
And it doesn't happen in volleyball, really, at all, the upsets. Certainly in other sports.
Yeah. And it happens, I mean, maybe not at the upper, like the
16-1, right.
Correct.
Right.
But there's some stuff going on there. And more so, the parity's continuing to grow.
The parity has grown, which has been great to see, even though we had 4 1 seeds here in the Final Four. I've enjoyed it, Erik. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Look forward to chatting in the future.
Appreciate it.
You got it.